from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
The West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, working with students and families to improve college access and student success for a better West Virginia.
Lanham for the Legislature Today. While logging in state forests is permitted, logging in state parks currently is not. It's an issue that's fired up lawmakers and citizens with this movement of Senate Bill 270. Tonight we'll hear from a director, a commissioner, a delegate, and first up, a senator. Senator Mike Woelfel took to the Senate floor last week.
The governor proposed the timbering of state parks, briefly mentioned in his State of the State address. Frankly, I wish we'd had fewer gag gifts and a little more substance on the justification for that. Because I believe Senate Bill 270 is incongruent with our promotion of tourism here in our state and the major investment that the governor asks us to make in tourism, which I believe is warranted. If you look at the proposal that was mentioned today, just cut taxes and win that proposed legislation, we're going to have great growth in this state because that's the justification for taking off the inventory tax. So if we're going to have great growth, why timber the state forests? One of the provisions of 270 is to allow timbering in any area of a state park not generally utilized by the public. Now that term is not defined in the bill, and you don't have to be Hank Thoreau to know that some of the best places in our state are the secluded parts of our state forests. Audra State Park would be timbered, Babcock State Park, Beartown, if you haven't been there, it's an amazing place. Beach Fork State Park, Berkeley Springs State Park, Blackwater Falls State Park, Blennerhassett Island Historical State Park, Bluestone State Park. Cabway Lingo is already being, because it's a state forest, it's already being timbered. Cacapon, Calvin Price, Camp Creek, Canaan Valley, Carnifex Ferry. We're even going to potentially timber Cass Scenic Railroad State Park. The old growth forests of Cathedral State Park. I think that might be the last preserved old growth forest we have. Greenbrier State Forest. Of course, that's in the viewshed of the Greenbrier Resort, so I don't know about that one. Hawks Nest State Park, Holly River State Park, Cambrai-Brow, Little Beaver, Lost River, Moncove, North Bend Trail. Now, really, are we in a position, are we more desperate than they were in 1929 and 31, that we've got to go in and timber these places? Mr. President, I'll close. I remember some months ago, you caught some heat. Pretty strong heat, and you took it for replacing our toilets. And as I walked in this morning, if this is going to be our new state policy, Senate Bill 270, I noticed some nice standing timber outside here. Cut it down and defray the costs of those commodes. Thank you.
Yesterday, in the opposite chamber, Delegate Roy Cooper stood in support of this bill, and in his words, support of state parks.
I've started getting some emails, and I'm sure you have too, concerning cutting timber in the state parks. And some folks out there think that we're going to clear cut every state park in the state. And as I understand it, we're going to do nothing of the sort. But maybe we should think about why we're going or even thinking about cutting timber in the first place. Most of the lodges built in West Virginia were built back in the late 60s, early 70s. I know the one in Summers County, Pipestem State Park, was finished along about 1968. Had a design flaw in it. It seems that the structure was held up by huge metal beams, and the ends of those beams have started to rot off, and to replace them is actually more expensive than building it to start with. However, the state park system does not generate enough money to even pay for those repairs and still operate the state parks. And so they've been in a quandary. And they've tried to close some golf courses in my area, close this, close that. I think we all remember those issues. So all of a sudden this idea to cut a little bit of timber comes up, and we all go crazy. The truth of it is, this bill is not going to allow, as I understand it, this bill, when we get it, will not allow clear cutting of anything. In fact, it's, I believe, limiting, the bill is going to limit it to 4 trees per acre. Now that means that every 208 by 208 section of land in that park will be 4 trees cut from it, and they have to be something like 24 or 26 inches in girth, chest high on an ordinary sized man. I believe that's how it's going to be. So we're not going to destroy these state parks, but the proceeds from the sale of this timber is just like the proceeds when I sell timber off of my farm. I use it to build something back or keep something running or whatever. But we've got to do something to make these state parks solvent, and this is one way we can do it without taking it to the backs of the taxpayer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
But what has been rather unusual about this issue is that it has pitted 2 Justice Administration officials against each other. Commissioner of Agriculture Kent Leonhart is actively speaking against the bill.
Senate Bill 270 is a bill that will allow harvesting of timber in the state parks. Just like Teddy Roosevelt did when he set up the national park system, we should be preserving the timber and the flora and the fauna in our state parks just the way nature would intend it to grow. Our citizens need to be able to see how nature really is and how things move in a natural way. You know, one of the fastest growing tourism industries is bird watching. If you harvest these mature trees, you're going to take away the habitat that some of these migratory birds use. So you're going to affect the tourism industry. Visitors to our state parks, they don't want to see stumps. They don't want to see logging roads. They don't want to see logging trucks being hauled out. We're trying to attract young people to the state of West Virginia. And the young people want to see mature, successional stage growth. They want to see things in nature. And when you look at the economic side of it, if we're not maximizing the timber harvest in our state forest, as Director Cook has stated, we're not, because he says he can get up to $20 million a year, then why don't we take a little bit of that money and direct it to the improvements in the state parks rather than leave it sit in the state forest? Just doesn't make sense to me economically. Trees haven't been marked. They don't really know the value. If you're going to tell them you can only cut 4 or 5 trees per acre and only half the value of the timber, well, a logger still has to bring his equipment in. He still has to build roads. So he's going to offer you a lower price per board foot than the market would allow. So really we'd be selling this resource at a lower rate than we would in the state forest. That's another economic reason I think this is a bad idea. I do not think it's been well thought out. I don't think it's been planned properly. I just don't think we should be taking a risk with our state parks, our state treasure.
Joining me now is Director of the West Virginia Division of Forestry, Mr. Barry Cook. Director Cook, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Andrew.
I know you said that this is a conservation effort, not a commercial logging program, and we've just heard from the Commissioner of Agriculture, and he called Senate Bill 270 poorly thought out with little foresight. What's your response to that?
Well, you know, Andrea, the forests are in our parks are very mature forests, and under good management, as the trees mature and before they reach an age at which they die, it's really good to harvest those. Trees are much like we are. We're born and we're young and we grow very viable. We reach a maturity age, and at some point our bodies begin to deteriorate and we actually die then. And trees follow this same, all plants really follow this same pattern. And the natural succession is when they're mature before they die, you remove them and that leaves room for the younger trees to come back and grow back into another forest for the next generation.
But why in state parks?
Well, West Virginia is unique. Our parks are huge. We have 38 state parks that take up about 81,000 acres. About 9 of those parks make up over half of that acreage. So I heard Senator speaking about logging in some of these smaller parks. That is not the intent of the bill. The logging would take place in these much larger parks in the back country away from the area that's used as recreational areas. Once the logging is completed, the road system and stuff that's put in place in order to remove the timber will be converted to new trails. This will actually expand the footprint of the park to where people can go deeper into the park and use more of the park for recreation.
What about tourism? There's a concern that we've heard from West Virginia citizens, and it's also been said that this is incongruent with our efforts to promote tourism in the state.
Done improperly, I would totally agree. But I have a good friend who is the state forester in the state of Ohio. Ohio practices forestry on their state forests as we do in West Virginia, but they also practice forestry on their state parks. After they harvest an area in both their parks and their forests, they put up monuments or placards which explains the type of harvesting that was actually done in that area. And they use it as an educational tool for the public. And their tourism has actually grown in their state parks. The usage of their parks has grown because of, they say because of this, and used it as an education tool. People are very interested in what was done in this area and why it was done.
If you're talking 4 trees per acre, why do it at all?
Well, it's 4 trees per acre average over the entire area that you designate to possibly be areas that can log. So say if you've got a park that's 10,000 acres and there's only 2,000 acres being used for the public, that would be 8,000 acres that you could have harvesting. Now, you would not harvest all that 8,000 acres at one time. It would be blocks in there. But the way the bill's written, you just average 4 trees per acre over that entire harvesting area. So it actually gives you the opportunity. You have acres that will have little or no trees on it, and you have acres that have more than 4, so you're really trying to average the 4. But under no circumstances can you ever remove more than 1/2 of the volume from any 1 acre, so that totally precludes ever being able to clear cut.
So we heard Delegate Cooper argue that state parks don't generate enough money for repairs. How bad are these needed repairs, and how much revenue is anticipated if this bill passes?
Well, all I can speak about is what I've been told from Director McDaniels, Director of DNR, and he said, as you heard, most of these parks, lodges and cabins and stuff were built in the 50s and 60s, so there's not been a lot of money spent on them over the years, so some of them in pretty bad repair, I understand. Again, I do not have the specifics of that because that's really not my area.
But is there no better revenue stream to establish for our state parks?
Well, this is not the only revenue stream they plan on using. There's other revenue streams that will be generated. Again, I really don't know exactly what all those are, but this is only part of the revenue stream that would be used.
Director Cook, you say the Agriculture Commissioner doesn't have jurisdiction here and that he doesn't have a dog in this fight.
Well, I tell you what, the other day I answered this question this way, and I'm going to answer it again. If Commissioner of Agriculture made a decision to do something around growing crops or raising cattle or chickens or something of that nature, I would never come out in opposition to it, because I'm under the assumption that's an area of expertise. Forestry is our area of expertise, and everybody has, it's a free country, so everybody has the opportunity to make a statement, but that's my only position on it.
But even as a private citizen and other private citizens who have emailed Delegate Cooper, as we heard earlier, doesn't everyone have a dog in this fight?
Well, they really do. The parks, but when I accepted this job, I accepted a judicial responsibility to the residents of the state of West Virginia. And around that is my responsibility to correctly manage the forest lands of the state of West Virginia. And what we're talking about doing on the parks is the right thing for the parks. In life, it's rare that you get the opportunity to do the right thing and have it funded, completely funded, without having to, someone said, without being on the backs of the taxpayers.
Do you feel like this bill will pass, at least in some form?
Actually, I do. And it may not be this year, but it will be down the road possibly. But I think it's got a good chance this year. It's the right thing. There's a lot of emotion attached to it. My daughter came home the other day and talked to me about this, it's just it's an emotional issue. But in the end, if people will understand the science, if they'll take the time to understand the science, and I tell people all the time, when we reach the day that people can disprove the science of forest management, I'll quit being a forester.
Well, Director Cook, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Next, the first wave of highway work from the West Virginia Roads to Prosperity Plan will start across the state as soon as the weather allows, according to the West Virginia Department of Transportation. While state hiring will start next month, Rebecca Turnbull reports from the Capitol that some private companies are already building up their workforce in anticipation.
Absolutely, we're hiring. Yeah, we're hiring, yes.
Those are words few people have been able to say up until recently, as construction companies across the state begin scheduling job fairs to hire workers as a result of the road bond referendum's passage in October. The workers will be committed to nearly 500 infrastructure projects across the state, made possible by the nearly $2.8 billion secured through the authorized selling of road bonds and a funding program passed by the legislature last session.
We have a need to create jobs and economic development, and we do that by building roads, but we also have the problem of how to pay for that. And that's been the biggest occurrence in the last year by the governor, by the legislature, to pass a historic highway funding bill that's going to allow us to build roads, maintain roads, create economic development, and most importantly, create high-paying jobs in West Virginia.
Make that 48,000 potential jobs, according to a study by Duke University. Although those jobs may only last until the referendum's provisions end in 2020, legislators expect the numerous infrastructure improvements made in those 3 years to have a lasting effect on the state's economic prosperity.
It's critical when you get to looking at the goods and services that West Virginians produce, or the reliance upon other goods and services to come into West Virginia so we can produce the things that we need to do. Our roadway system is absolutely critical. If you don't have a good road system, obviously transportation costs go up, whether it's coming in or going out, and that impacts West Virginia in an adverse way.
Several companies recognize some of the challenges within West Virginia's workforce. One such company, Mid-Atlantic, acknowledges the state's drug addiction epidemic and says it wants to provide opportunity and be part of the solution.
We like to hire people who have had drug problems and are willing to get sober and want another chance. We have definitely an open door policy. We have several recovering addicts and alcoholics who work for us now. currently. So we'll do whatever we can for people who want another chance, come knocking on our door. We'll find something for them to do if they're willing.
And according to some current road maintenance workers, those open jobs will continue to be available, even past the completion of the 500 highway projects currently being planned and funded for the next 3 years.
The roads are always going to need work. I mean, look at the roads right now after these last 2 weeks. I mean, a lot of potholes coming in. So roads are just something that you're always going to have to be working on them. But this, this project's going to be a lot of big projects that have needed done for a while are going to be taken care of. So the work's always going to be here as long as we have people to do it.
For now, however, workers are happy to see the rubber finally meeting the road for Governor Justice's promises to bring jobs, jobs, jobs. As the weather turns, we should be able to see some of those projects getting started and those jobs on the roads. Rebecca Turnbull, West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The State Department of Transportation and the West Virginia Contractors Association have scheduled a job fair February 16th, starting at 10 a.m. at the Bridge Valley Community and Technical Center in Charleston. According to the department website, they're looking for highway workers, engineers, accountants, and environmentalists. Joining me now is senior reporter Dave Mistich. Dave, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Andrea.
So there was a lot of stuff going on today, and on the House floor, they debated the film tax credit, but of course they delayed it.
Right. There was a lot of conversations. I think a lot of Democrats argued that in caucus they got different numbers than what the finance chair was providing there on the floor. A lot of different arguments as to how much impact that had, either net gain or net loss to the state. There are some caps to how much that credit could come in. It could be given out to each individual company. Delegate Graves spoke about the bill, and she made some arguments based on her experience in the film industry itself. So.
We talk about industry diversification within the state. We're just starting to have a decent film crew industry in the state. I know a lot of them personally. I can't tell you how many phone calls and emails where these people are going to have to move across. Most of them are planning on going to Kentucky if we discontinue this film tax credit. Also, I know of 4 businesses, it's just me, one person, who are planning on relocating across the border if we get rid of this film tax credit because they are in the film industry.
So another thing we had going on today is co-tenancy, and I understand that you covered a little bit about that today too.
Right, that was in House Energy today. There's a lot of talk about that. It's sort of, it deals with landowner rights and heirs to property. Basically in the bill right now, 75% of a group of people that own a particular piece of property can call for drilling to take place underneath that piece of property. Delegate Bill Anderson is the chair of the House Energy Committee, and here's what he had to say about that bill today.
I had a request from the minority to defer action on the bill in committee until next Tuesday, giving all of their members a chance to pose any other questions and members to formulate amendments they might want to offer to the legislation. It seemed to be a reasonable request, and I've accommodated that. I believe that we can move forward on the legislation next Tuesday.
One other thing that's been going on this week is the DHHR bill to reorganize it into 4 different entities, and both of us were in the House Health Committee together with that.
Right, and they delayed that until tomorrow as well, so it's sort of carried on this theme, especially over in the House. Of course, the film tax credit, the co-tenancy bill, excuse me, and then into the DHHR reorganization. There was some talk about holding over House Bill 4012 in the House Health Committee. That's the one that limits abortions through taxpayer-funded abortions through Medicaid. That bill, there's a lot of questions right now about the constitutionality of that bill. In 1993, the Supreme Court struck down a similar piece of legislation, but that bill actually did get brought up for discussion, was passed through the committee on a voice vote, Delegate Mike Pushkin offered an amendment to include rape and incest in the situations where an abortion would be allowed. But again, that amendment failed, but the bill did clear out of the House Health Committee. Over in Senate Judiciary, they did talk about the West Virginia Intermediate Courts. There's a lot of discussion about that. That bill did not go to a vote in that committee. So a lot of bills being discussed, a lot of things happening, not a lot of movement on a lot of things today. So.
We don't have too much time left. Do you have any final thoughts on what you want to cover tomorrow or next week?
I think moving forward with this House Bill 4012, that's going to be a big one. Again, the constitutionality issue there, I think we're going to see a lot of questions about that. There was some talk about a constitutional amendment to take care of that issue this session. We haven't seen whether that yet. It's kind of up in the air whether or not we'll see it, but the House is moving in that direction on that particular bill. So.
Message, senior reporter, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
We're out of time this evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andrea Lanham for the Legislature Today. Have a good night.
Thank you.